Chapter 25. Janus. Janus, said Glyssa. She pointed her sword at the Vidalcan across the pool. I've been looking for you. The guards broke into two groups of four and glided around both sides of the pool. Save your bravado. It does not frighten me or my guards. Glyssa waited. Janus seemed content to let his guards take care of her. His mistake. She waited until the groups were halfway around either side of the pool, then made her move. Glyssa ran towards one group. The guards raised their weapons and arms and fired. Glyssa dived forward underneath the harpoons. She rolled and came up running, barreling into the guards before they could fire again. Glyssa tumbled to the ground atop one of the guards. Her sword fell from her hand and skittered across the floor, out of reach. The guard wrapped its arms around Glyssa and held her fast. She pushed against the ground, trying to break free, but the guard's grip was too strong. Maybe she had made the mistake. The hair on the back of her neck began to tingle. The other guards had recovered. She pushed hard with one hand and rolled over, pulling the construct on top of her. A bolt of lightning slammed into the guard, knocking it off Glyssa, but now she was exposed, and the tingling had not subsided. Glyssa rolled across the floor as two more bolts impacted behind her. She grabbed her sword as she rolled over to it and swung it at the nearest guard. The blade bit into the base of the construct and stuck. Glyssa rolled over again and spun the impaled guard onto the floor. Its weapon arm snapped off as the guard slammed into the floor. Glyssa jumped to her feet, yanked her sword out, and kicked the helpless guard across the floor towards its two companions. As the two guards glided from their path of the skidding construct, Glyssa glanced at the other group. They had reached the other door. They would be in harpoon range soon. She was running out of time. Glyssa got an idea. She scooped up a harpoon from the broken weapon arm and hurled it at the head of the closest guard. The missile smashed through the creature's globe top. Lightning crackled back along the shaft. Glyssa dived to the side as the guard's head exploded. Shards of glass and metal shredded the guard next to it. The tattered remains of both guards dropped to the ground and fell into the pool of knowledge. Glyssa scrambled back to her feet and moved around the pool, away from the second group of guards. Janus moved. Aren't you worried about Memnarch finding out about your campaign to kill me? She asked Janus as she closed in on him. The Vidalcan didn't seem cowed by her words or her quick disposal of half his guards. I don't know what you think you are, but the truth of this world would make you want to curl up in the crook of one of your tangle trees and cry yourself to sleep. Why don't you leave the running of Mirrodin to your masters? Glyssa continued to stalk around the pool, just out of range of the oncoming guards. Pontifex was backing away from the well, but the Vidalcan leader held his ground. So now you're my master, she asked. Hardly. Ah, but I do know how to control you, as I proved in that dark little forest of yours. Pontifex stepped past Brenna. The female mage had pushed herself into the wall. She was now trying to strip of her cloak around her thigh and stop the bleeding. Pontifex, grab the human traitor and bring her to me, if you please. Leave her out of this, said Glyssa. She broke into a run. Stop, said Janus. Or I will kill her, and you know I can do it. I proved that in the tangle as well. Glyssa stopped. Don't you people ever tire of hearing yourselves speak? She taunted. The guards continued to move towards her. Janus smiled. You brought her into this, bound her to your destiny, so don't blame me if you cause her death. Pontifex moved in on Brenna, but when he bent down to grab her, she thrust her arms up and released a huge blast of wind. The Vidalcan researcher flew up into the air, riding Brenna's vortex. He slammed into the ceiling above the pool. Then Brenna released the spell and let him fall. A huge wave of silvery liquid washed over the chamber, drenching Glyssa's legs and pushing the guards back away into the wall. Glyssa watched Pontifex sink from sight, pulled down by the weight of his robes. I'm not dead yet, spat Brenna, but the backwash began pulling her across the slippery floor but toward the pool's edge. Glyssa started forward, but the hair on the back of her neck began to tingle. She looked at the approaching guards. Their heads glowed with a crackling energy. She twirled and flung her sword at the group. All 4 guards flew back a few feet and shot their beams of lightning at the sword. The energy disappeared into the blade as it clattered to the floor. Glissa glanced back at Bruenna, but Janus rushed forward and grabbed her by the neck. He lifted the mage off the floor and flung her back against the wall. Bruenna crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The guards again advanced, their weapons arm raised. Glissa needed to rid herself of them quickly so she could confront Janus without further interruptions. She raced towards the guards, dodging back and forth to avoid harpoons. As she reached the first, Glissa threw up an arm to block its attack. The metal clanged against metal and pain shot up her arm, but she got inside its reach. Glissa grabbed the construct around the torso and twisted it around to keep its weapons pointed away from her. She spun to face the other guards. With no clear shot past her hover shield, the guards hesitated. Glissa took the opening and rushed forward. She slammed her shield guard into the next guard in line and shoved them both over the lip of the pool. They fired their thrusters over the glistening liquid, but that did little more than create large ripples that splashed over the edge. Both guards dropped into the pool of knowledge, firing their harpoons wildly before sinking from sight. Glissa stood between the last 2 guards. They raised their arms to fire. Glissa kicked out at the one behind her as she ducked under the harpoon arm of the one in front of her. Its shot flew over Glissa and slammed into the reeling guard behind her, sending it over the edge of the pool as well, where it sank down next to its companions. Glissa grabbed her sword as she straightened up and whirled completely around, swinging the sword in a blazing circle. Electricity still crackled up and down its blade as it sliced through the last guard, just below its domed head. Glissa turned and glared at Janus. The Vidalcan stood over the unconscious Bruenna, holding her head up by the hair with one hand while pointing his staff at her face with the other. His second set of hands clapped very slowly. Impressive, but ultimately futile. I don't think you want another death on your hands. Give yourself up to me and I will spare the human's life. Janus shifted his hand up on the staff and it flashed. The doors on either side opened. 6 more guards flew into the room through each door and moved to surround Glissa. She was trapped, and her arms ached from the guards' blow. She couldn't handle another dozen guards. Glissa thought for a moment about diving into the pool, but if she left, Bruenna would surely die. How do I know I can trust you? You do not. But you have no other choice, do you? Said Janus. You will release all of my friends? She asked. Yes. And leave the other races alone? You have my word. The guards lined up on either side of Glissa. She could feel their energy pulsing along the hairs on the back of her neck. She truly had no choice. Then I surrender, she said. Take her, said Janus. 2 guards moved in and grabbed Glissa's arms. Pain shot up her sore arm when the guard wrenched it away from her. The other 10 guards circled around her. Now hold her so she can watch as I melt another one of her friends. No, screamed Glissa. Janus began his spell. Mana built up around the top of his staff. Glissa felt rage and fear triggering something inside, just as it had after Kane's death. In an instant, green tendrils of energy enveloped her body and coursed up and down her arms and legs. Without even thinking, Glissa unleashed the power. The tendrils coalesced around her hands and flashed to the guards holding her. Both guards went rigid and began shaking as energy spiraled around and through their bodies. A moment later, tendrils shot out of the 2 guards holding her out to the 10 surrounding guards. A spider web of emerald energy pulsed around Glissa as the guards shuddered and broke apart under the magical onslaught. Then it ended, as quickly as it had begun. All 12 guards disintegrated into piles of fine silver powder around Glissa. The entire incident happened before Janus could finish summoning mana. Glissa slumped to the floor, spent. Her arms and legs felt dead. Her pulse was racing, and she couldn't catch her breath. She rested on her hands and knees and stared at Janus across the pool. The Vidalcan didn't speak. He merely dropped Bruenna's body and began moving around the pool towards Glissa. The end of his staff pulsed with energy. Why? Asked Glissa as she continued to gasp for air. Why do you want me dead? Because you threaten our way of life, our mastery of this world, Because Memnarch will use you to destroy Mirrodin, and it is our duty as the master race to protect the other races from you. Liar! Someone screamed. Pontifex rose up into the pool behind Janus. He floated above the liquid. His wet robes matted against his body, glistening in the flickering lights of the room. Liar! He screamed again. With a flip of his hand, Pontifex flew towards his leader. Liquid sprayed from his robes behind him like a wake as he slammed into Janus and pushed him back into the wall of the chamber. Pontifex grabbed Janus's staff and tossed it to the floor behind him. The leader of the synod grabbed at the researcher's wet robes and tried to push him away, but Pontifex grabbed the leader's domed head in two hands and flung it against the wall. Gussa heard a loud crack. Liquid began oozing from the dome, covering Janus's head. The leader let go of Pontifex and grabbed at his headpiece with all four hands, frantically trying to find the source of a leak. Pontifex, still holding Janus, turned to look at Gussa, who was still kneeling on the floor watching the strange spectacle. He convinced the synod to destroy the champions of each race, explained Pontifex, and told them it was to safeguard our power. Told them that we would lose our power if Memnarch succeeded. It's true. Memnarch will destroy the world. We will all be lost. All but you. Isn't that right, Janus? Pontifex turned to accuse his leader. I have seen all your lies hidden deep within the pool of knowledge. You would usurp our god and take his place, dooming us and everyone on Mirrodin, all for your own glory. Janus's robes darkened from the liquid draining from his dome. The level inside the dome had fallen past the top of the leader's head. Janus began to shake uncontrollably. Gussia glanced over at Brenna. She still lay unconscious where Janus dropped her, but she was dangerously close to the edge of the pool. You were right, Glissa. Memnarch doesn't want you dead, for he needs you alive for the final phase of his grand experiment. Janus ordered you killed because you arrived too soon and upset his own plans. For you see, the snake planned to take Memnarch's place in the grand design, but he wasn't ready yet to move against our god, so you needed to be eliminated. The liquid was now below Janus's flattened nose. Gussia could hear him gasping for breath. His eyes, which had been dark and sunken, now protruded from their sockets. He struggled against Pontifex, obviously desperate to get around from the researcher and fix his cracked dome. The two Vidalcan pushed against one another. Their arms flailed for purchase on each other's wet robes. Janus whipped his head towards and slammed his cracked globe into the front of Pontifex's own dome. The researcher's head snapped back and he lost his balance. Pontifex fell away from Janus. He tried to grab the leader's robe to steady himself, but Janus knocked Pontifex's arms away and pushed him to the floor. I will kill you for this insolence, Pontifex, screamed Janus. His voice warbled as the liquid sloshed around his mouth. Janus stepped over Pontifex and headed for his staff, which still pulsed with summoned mana. Gussia scrambled forward and dived for the staff. Janus reached for it but fell to the floor just short. Gussia grabbed the staff and rolled over. Pontifex grasped his leader's robe again, pulling him away from the staff. Gussia scrambled to her feet and lowered the head of the staff to touch Janus's cracked dome. Leave him to me, and I will make sure Janus pays for his lies, pays for his crimes against the Vidalcan and our god. I think not. He needs to pay for his crimes against my people, my family. She flicked her wrist as she had seen Janus do the night in the tangle. She wasn't sure the staff would work for her, but Janus hadn't spoken when he activated the staff's power earlier. It all seemed to be in the hands. A stream of blue energy streaked from the staff and enveloped Janus. The Vidalcan screamed and clutched at his chest. Pontifex released the leader's robes and rolled back towards the wall. Gussia held the staff steady and poured more mana into the effect. The remaining liquid inside the dome began to boil. Bubbles filled the dome and popped against the cracked glass. Smoke rose from Janus's robes as he tore at the fabric with his hands. Gussia kept pumping mana from the staff into the spell. The skin on the Vidalcan's arms blistered and peeled away, Layer after layer of skin sloughed off until the Vidalcan's muscles were exposed. These melted off the bones, leaving a sticky goo on the smouldering robes. It was a gruesome sight. Memories of Cain welled up inside her as Glyssa watched Giannis melt before her. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't turn away. She had to see this through, to extract her revenge. The glass dome on Giannis's head shattered, and Glyssa could see his eyes, almost pleading with her to let him die. After all, the leader still lived. Glyssa could have ended his pain with a quick swing of her sword, but she didn't. He didn't deserve a noble death at the end of her sword. He deserved pain. Finally, there was nothing left of Giannis except robes, bones, and a skull rattling around inside of the shattered dome. Glyssa broke the Vidalcan staff over her knee and dropped it on his robes. She glanced at Pontifex, who was curled up against the wall. She shook her head and walked over towards Barena's crumpled body. Glyssa sat down next to Barena, lifted the unconscious mage's head and cradled it in her lap. It's over. Not exactly, my dear, said Pontifex. He had risen and walked over to the door that led to the corridor. The researcher passed his hand over the dark circle of the wall, and an alarm began ringing out in the corridor. For you see, I am loyal to Memnoch, and I plan to deliver you to him for the final phase of his glorious experiment.